we've come to the end of the series and I'm so sad about it. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome to my channel. My name is Stephanie Yates Anya Buile, Steph Anya for short, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Today, I'm going to be breaking down the second part of the Breaking Dawn books and breaking down part 2, the movie. If you're curious, stay tuned. What's on your mind? So, of course, I love to set the stage by talking about my thoughts on the movie. For those of you who weren't there when this movie came out, this was the Twilight fans' version of the Avengers. Okay, this was the moment that everybody was both waiting for and dreading. And I remember being in the theater and everyone was just dead silent, but you heard tears, you heard applause. I think it was last year, a friend told me about them re-showing all of the Twilight movies in the theaters, and I was there all day, and it was so interesting to hear the difference in how the audience was responding back when I first watched it when I was a teenager to watching it as an adult. And we were collectively laughing at how dumb some things are, but at the same time you knew everybody was there because they loved it. So this is a movie that was definitely long anticipated. I would never say it was one of my favorites in the series, only because, like we talked about in Eclipse, the more political storylines are not very interesting to me. And this entire book is about the Volturi, which I'm not very invested or interested in the storylines of the Volturi. So those things are not really interesting, but it was fun to see Bella and Edward become parents and things like that. So that's what we'll be talking about today. We'll be talking about seeing the transition of Bella and Edward into parenthood and kind of talking about what that looks like for most couples. We'll be talking about Irina, who is a vampire that ends up being the person who tells on Bella and Edward. We'll be talking a little bit about the relationship between Benjamin and Eamon, and we'll be talking about Bella as a shield. So I'm ready to jump into talking about this last bit of Twilight, and I can't wait for us to jump into whatever our next series is going to be. So please be sure to put your suggestions in the comments below. I've been reading them. I've been starting my research to see what's best, and I've even started reading The Hunger Games for our book club because a lot of you have been asking about that one, and I've never read the books. So that's very important to me to read the books before I make a decision about whether or not we'll be covering it on the channel. So if you'd like to join us with that, definitely make sure that you check out What's on Your Page book club. So let's talk about, we ended off the last movie talking about Jacob imprinting on Renesmee, which we all have our feelings about, but one thing that it did accomplish plot-wise is it prevents the wolves from being able to attack her. We are kind of introduced to the idea of Jacob imprinting as a good thing, so that way Renesmee is safe from another threat. Bella wakes up as a vampire for the first time. This is supposed to be her big reveal. You know, I will say, I think Bella looked normal to me. They kind of make it a big deal about how when you become a vampire, you just look so different and you're gorgeous and glamorous. I'd love to hear from you guys. Were you impressed? Was there any shock value to Bella's reveal as a vampire? It just seemed like they gave her some extensions and gave her some lashes to me. It was nothing I thought that made her look very different. When Bella becomes a vampire, of course, one of the first things that she's interested in doing is meeting her daughter, but she goes hunting for the first time, is able to magically, Bella has so much plot armor in these stories. She doesn't even ever act like a real vampire. She's very tempted to have human blood, but is able to have supernatural self-control and instead hunts with animals, as the Cullens have been doing for decades. Once she's able to meet Renesmee, Bella has questions. Obviously, she deals with the situation with Jacob imprinting. We already talked about that in the last video, and I don't have a ton more to say. But I think the interesting thing is Bella asking questions like,
where does she sleep?
You know, everyone's been caring for Renesmee before Bella even had a chance to properly meet her. And so that is a really disarming feeling, right? Is to the child you've been carrying, that you advocated for and protected. Everyone else has a relationship with her, and you're asking questions about, oh, what does it mean when she puts her hand on my face and I can see these things? Or where does she sleep? You know, what does she eat? Like, all of these questions are questions that a mother is going to be uncomfortable asking about their own child. But what I thought would be interesting to talk about here is that transition for a couple into parenthood. This, of course, is one of those big transitions where we end up seeing a lot of couples. I have a couple I'll be starting with very soon talking to me specifically about wanting to understand how can their relationship thrive in the midst of trying to care for a newborn and acclimate to their new roles as parents. One of the things that I remember studying in graduate school that really fascinated me and has absolutely stayed with me the entire time that I've been working as a marriage and family therapist are the stages of the family life cycle that McGoldrick and his team identified. And I'm going to go through those different transitions that we see where the family has the potential to experience a lot of stress and thus issues with everyone and knowing their role within the family. I'm going to go through the list, but we're going to talk more specifically about the transition into parenthood. So these are the stages of the family life cycle. Hence, the moments where we're more likely to meet a new client because they're in the midst of a major transition. First is leaving the home. Second is forming a couple. So you find your person and you start doing life with that person. Third is families with young children. And this is the thing that we're going to come back to. But for those of you who are curious about all of the different stages, I want to make sure that you know what they are. Families with adolescents. This one is interesting because it's also the time where the parents are taking care of both their children as well as aging parents. So that is a very stressful portion of the family life cycle. Launching children and moving into middle life. This is where we see the empty nest stage, where I definitely work with couples and individuals who are talking to me about the difference in their relationship now without having the purpose of managing children together. Families in late middle age. This is where they're accepting new roles like grandparenthood. And then we move into the final stage, which is families nearing end of life. So these are the primary transitions that we'll see within families that lead those families, couples, individuals into looking for additional support from us so that they can really solidify who am I at this point in my life. So families with young children, the process here that you have to focus on is accepting new members into the family, which are the babies. The biggest challenge we see here are the couples trying to navigate and negotiate how they are going to child rear. What does discipline look like? How much of a priority is tending to the children over our relationship? I see a lot of disagreements about that. But the biggest thing here we see is realigning the relationship so that you can make space and negotiate the roles of parents and grandparents, right? So we're negotiating with the relationships that have held the most priority before. So, for example, you may start your own traditions with Thanksgiving, Christmas, and you might not be revisiting family. Now, in the movie, we actually see that Edward and Bella choose to take Renesmee to be with Charlie and his new partner, who is Sue Clearwater, for the holidays. So we see a little blended family moment there with Sue's kids, Charlie's kids, and now we have a grandchild in the mix. And so the interesting thing here is that sometimes that is where a lot of conflict arises. I all the time have couples talking with me about the fact that such and such grandparent wants the kids for the summer, or a disappointment that their grandparents are not more involved, and trying to figure out at what scale should my parents still be helping me at this stage of life. A lot of parents feel inadequate in how much support they need from their parents during this transition, as they always envision themselves being very self-sufficient. So for Edward and Bella, a lot of these things are not issues, because what are the primary resources that we see leading to arguments and stress? Finances, right? Trying to figure out, do we need the most expensive crib? Do we need the most expensive car seat? Trying to assess, do we invest in the best, or do we try to stretch our money as much as possible so that we're not depleting our bank account and can support our kid in other ways? That is one of the stressors that I see that does not affect Edward and Bella. The other thing that doesn't affect them is the limited resource of energy, right? They don't have to sleep. So it doesn't affect them that they have a newborn that might be crying throughout throughout the night that they have to stay up with and lose sleep, and they become short with each other, disappointed in each other, resentful of each other, wanting the other person to step up more and help them with parenting. These are factors that do not apply to Edward and Bella. So the question may be, well, why are you talking about it if there's something that doesn't affect the characters? Because that could be a problem. When we are watching these sorts of movies and we're excited about seeing our favorite characters move into family life, marriage, and these kind of things are not depicted, it gives us a false illusion of what those transitions will look like. Hence, why we end up feeling so disappointed and frustrated with our reality, because our expectations are skewed by what's being portrayed on screen. And some people will say, well, it's just a movie, so you shouldn't think your real life is going to be like a movie. And we can say that, but more than likely, most of us have been affected in some way or another by media depictions, whether it's social media, whether it's a movie, whether it's a book, and we're comparing our actual life in one way or another. Even if you're looking at a cookbook, even if you're looking at a recipe and you're comparing how yours came out to how it looks in the magazine, and you feel any sense of disappointment, that is you being affected by images or stories in the media that do not align with your reality. So most of us are not exempt from it, even if it's easier to look down on people who do have expectations that are affected. Most of us are a part of that group. And so I talk about these things because the most important thing to me is that we are able to use these movies, TV shows as a springboard to help enhance our own lives. If you are moving to that transition, I don't want it to be idealized that you won't have some sort of frustration. This can both be the best, absolute best part of your life and also the most stressful, the most disappointing, and lead to the most resentment. It's completely possible for you to be experiencing multiple things at once. Things such as, what school would Renesmee go to? Trying to watch her development. This is something that actually did affect them. Is when you're looking at your kid and you're trying to determine, is their development on track with what we should expect at this age? Those sorts of questions are things that every parent encounters, and even Bella and Edward encounter it, but of course she's more advanced than she should be for her age, which also stresses them out because they start questioning her life expectancy. But all of these things are things that you have to anticipate in advance, and there is no shame in needing to seek out support in those transitions. We actually expect it, and we're happy to talk you through those changes in life, even if it's just for a few sessions, just so you can get your own thoughts out and make some decisions about what works best for your family. Okay, so now let's talk about Irina. So Irina is yet another character that is depicted in the storyline where I think most of us, if you're a fan, were frustrated by her. First, with how she was acting at their wedding. She doesn't believe that Laurent was trying to kill Bella in New Moon. She believes that there was some other explanation for why he was killed and that the Cullens are at fault in some way. But she shows up to the wedding anyway, really seems like under duress, like she didn't really want to be there. The thing about Irina is that at that point, you can understand if you had a lover and your lover mysteriously went missing and it's not consistent with your understanding of them. I think most of us could give her grace there. But I think where she lost a lot of us is where she sees this child, and instead of actually asking any questions of the Cullens of who is this child, what did you do, she instead immediately goes to the Volturi and essentially tattles on them. She tells on them and says they've done something against the law. Carlisle and Edward explain why she did that, but for the longest time I couldn't understand. If your mother had created an immortal child before, which Renesmee is not, but that is what she thought Renesmee was, you would think that she would be more understanding, because you say, okay, your mother ended up being killed as a result of that situation. And you're now putting other people that you claim to love and consider family in the same position of being killed for the same crime, something that has not been an issue for you. They show in the flashbacks that she is distraught when her mother is being punished for creating an immortal child. So even if you didn't think it was a good idea for the immortal child to be in existence, the fact that you would put more people that you care for in harm's way without even asking questions just does not make sense until I remembered about one of the defense mechanisms that Freud talks about that we very rarely explore when we talk about defense mechanisms. I made a whole video on defense mechanisms and never even thought to include this one, and it's called reaction formation. So what is reaction formation? The act of dealing with an anxiety-provoking emotion or unacceptable feeling by mastering the exact opposite of that feeling or emotion to directly oppose it. This is a really interesting defense mechanism that I think we see so often, but we don't have a name for it. And it's essentially when a person takes the opposite stance from what their actual stance is on something as a form of defending themselves, usually for having an opinion or feelings that seem to be very different from the majority. The best example for reaction formation is, I think about two things: toxic masculinity, where you might have a man who is actually fearful, intimidated, insecure about being masculine. And so how does he respond to that? He goes overboard and becoming very masculine, what he would interpret to be masculine in order to compensate for those feelings of lack. Or I think about internalized homophobia. So you may have a person who knows that they have an attraction to the same sex. Maybe they've been raised in an environment to believe that that is wrong. And so the way that they deal with that is by spewing hatred and anger toward other people who are living more authentically in their sexual orientation in order to hide the fact that they actually have that in common with them. And so in this case with Irina, that's what I thought about when I thought about the fact that she's aligning with essentially the oppressors in this situation, the very people who took her mother away from her. They could have just taken care of the immortal child, right? That could have been the way they handled that situation and let her mother live. But they punished her mother through death. And that wound has led her to aligning with the law. That is the only safety that she sees, because in the end, they won. So even though she should be angry, frustrated with the Volturi for the way that they took her mother from her, she actually aligns with them and is overcompensating, maybe even for her mother's misdeeds, by trying to be the perfect citizen and tell on the Cullens. That is the only sense I can make of the way that she interpreted that situation. Perhaps she actually was very worried about an immortal child disrupting everything, but I highly doubt that, because I know that they live similarly to the Cullens, but I just can't see her valuing the lives of her cousins that she cares about. But I could be wrong about that. I'm curious, why do you think Irina took it to the Volturi instead of at least having a conversations with the Cullens about what was happening? We know that she clearly loves the Cullens, because in the end, she says to them, the Cullens are innocent, right? She still advocated for them, yet somehow it was important to her to make sure that they were disciplined for the law that she believes that they broke. And can we take a second to just talk about the plot of this movie? I mean, it makes no sense. It starts with Irina not having a conversation with the Cullens. Their way of dealing with it is by gathering a bunch of friends so that they can all stand as witness, which is going to, of course, look like an army to the Volturi. And their rationale for doing that and putting everyone in harm's way is by saying that once the Volturi comes, they're not coming to have a conversation, they're coming to kill them. Yet when the Volturi get there, they definitely are just standing there looking at them, and they do have a conversation with them. I mean, it's not like they had no interest at all in talking to them. And, you know, Errol loves to hear himself speak. So that was just, to me, very flawed logic. If anything, I would have had at least one person from our clan go to Italy and try to have a conversation with them. Maybe someone that's not directly involved, like Emmett, someone they're not interested in having, or someone they're not interested in capturing, who has, Errol could read his thoughts. I just feel like that would make more sense as the first line of defense than gathering all these people that you care about, taking all this time to do that just so that they can see their witnesses and have a conversation with them. I mean, obviously it was going to turn into some sort of brawl. I just thought that that whole plot was ridiculous. It didn't make any sense to me. But It was like the Avengers because we get to see all of these superpowers. You got people who can create electricity, and then you got Benjamin who can bend the elements at will. He can move fire, wind, water. And I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between Benjamin and Amun, because Amun created Benjamin. And it seems as though once he realized that Benjamin had this power to wield the elements, that he became fearful of the world finding out about that power, and maybe even more specifically the Volturi, knowing how they like to collect prizes. Hence, what they really want this whole time is Alice, and that's why Alice goes missing. The thing about their relationship is that it felt very familiar. This is a dynamic that I see in sessions, not all the time, but I do see this where, especially in relationships, less with a parent and a child. Typically what I see with a gifted child is that the parent almost wants to show them off. They look at it as a reflection of their self. I know that's not always the case, but that is what I see most of the time. But sometimes in relationships, I see where you have one partner who is gifted, talented, smart, beautiful, whatever attribute that the world would deem to be a wonderful attribute, and their partner almost trying to diminish that, trying to keep them locked in. It's a very toxic dynamic, but it's also very common. And if you've experienced or seen anything like this, please validate it in the comments, because I know there will be a lot of people be like, who would be with someone like that? And honestly, it happens a lot more than you would think. What happens is a person is attracted to this trait about this other person. Maybe they're really charming and know how to work a room. Maybe they are really stunningly beautiful. And this is the very thing that attracts the person to them. But then once they get them, they remember how that is what enticed them in the first place, and they become really insecure and fearful that those same traits are going to take this person away from them. And that might not always be taken away in terms of another person taking them, which of course is one of the top fears, but it could be my partner is a very talented singer. And if they really start putting themselves out there online and people realize how good of a singer they are, they're going to get the big head and realize that they shouldn't be with me. Or maybe they'll get signed and someone will take them away from me. They have to tour. It can be something as simple as, even if it's the most far-fetched insecurity. I can't tell you how many times I've had people finally reveal the thing that they're so afraid of in their relationship. And for it to be, even as they're saying it, they're like, I know this is an irrational fear, but this is the thing I'm thinking about every day. They are worried about sharing this gift of this person with the world because they're afraid that that person is going to realize that they're not as gifted. So it really comes from a space of insecurity and inferiority complex. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes this person recognizes the greatness of their partner, but they also know that there's a greatness in themselves. And maybe they got together at a point where they had the upper hand. Maybe that partner was always the talented one in the relationship, or they were the one in the relationship that had a ton of friends. Maybe they were the one in the relationship that dressed the other person, and they really took pride in being able to put together good looks. And then that other partner starts finding their self and their talents and their skills or their friends. And the original partner is just uncomfortable with that dynamic shift. This is also what happens when people come into therapy as an individual and they're in a relationship. I always tell them, be warned that some of your relationships may start shifting for the worst as a result of the insight you're gaining about yourself. Because if a person starts building their confidence, recognizing their best attributes, not being afraid to put them out there, you can see a change in those relationships where the dynamic was this person was always helping this one. And now this one is at their level or maybe even higher, and they can help you. That's a very uncomfortable feeling for people who may have narcissistic traits. So it can be a very wide range of ways that this dynamic plays out, where you identify a person who is gifted in some way, and the part of you that just doesn't want to let go of them thinks that the only way to prevent yourself from losing them is to shield them from the world. If you feel yourself feeling that pull, be very careful, because that is normally a fast track way to end up losing that person. Because as they're talking to other people about what's happening in their relationship, other people are saying, Does that sound healthy to you? Do you think that they are jealous of you? These are the conversations they will be having with other people. And if you try to prevent them from talking to other people, they will definitely be able to figure it out. So be careful. If you are finding yourself in a position like Amun, where you are wanting to shield the person you love from the world because you're kind of afraid of losing them, definitely talk about it in therapy. Find someone that you can talk through this with, because there are probably parts of yourself that you have not fully explored that could be just as great as your partner or your best friend or anyone that you're feeling a little bit worried about losing due to other people finally seeing just how great they are. And the last character analysis I want to do is about Bella as a shield. I'll say, for all of the flaws in Stephenie Meyer's character and plot development, I think this is one of my favorite things that she did, was that the reason why Edward couldn't read Bella's thoughts from the very beginning, because she had this inherent gift of shielding herself. And we see that that expands into her being able to have a supernatural power that ultimately save everyone. And I thought that that was so on brand for Bella's character, is that Bella has always been the type of person that is looking to protect everyone around her. And now she's able to use that power to also shield herself. Bella usually is the person that's suffering for other people's satisfaction and pleasure. We've seen it throughout the series. And now she can at least protect herself along with the people that she loves. She can expand it out to care for them and to care for herself. I think it was a big lesson, because if Bella is the shield, if she's compromised, everyone else loses that protection. And that, I think, was a character arc that is not very much talked about, is that is the inherent lesson in that moment, is that Bella has to make sure that she's good, that she's secure, because if she's not there, then every single person out here is at risk. Even though we see that in a supernatural way in the movies, that we know that these people exist in the real world. We all have that person in our lives. I hope that we all have had that experience of that person in our lives that just shows up, and when they're there, they make everything better. You know, I've got those people in my life where I know if I am feeling anxious, if I'm feeling worried, and I have them with me, it's like it's a soothing balm. What you have to be careful of with those people is making sure that you are checking in on them too. With those people, our shields of our world, the ones who make sure everything is okay, make sure that you're checking in on them. You know, the whole check on the strong friend. The thing about a shield is they don't always come across as the strong friend. Sometimes they come across really as the really sensitive one, because they are empathetic and picking up on what everybody else is feeling. And they seem like they're just always constantly overwhelmed. Yet when we're struggling, they show up for us. And so making sure, what I tried to start doing within the last few years especially, is for the shields of my life, the ones who I know they always show up for everybody, they make sure that they're there on time, they're asking, how can I help? They're actually helping, asking them, what do you need for you today? How can I help you? And how can I keep you from going overboard to help me? Like, I'll have people come over to my house and I'm like, okay, your job is literally just to sit here and watch TV. Like, we do not have to do anything. I don't need you to be there for me in this moment. I don't need you to help me wash dishes. I don't need you to help, like, just sit down and relax, please. And so with Bella, I'm hoping that she gets to a point in her life where she can establish some boundaries. But the thing about these shields, the people in our lives that do take the brunt of that on, they aren't really often asking themselves that. That's why I'm not talking directly to them right now. Thank you, shields, for all that you do. However, if you've got a shield in your life, I'm talking to you, because we have to be the people that check in on them and make sure that they are doing okay, because they will just go, wipe themselves. Give them the opportunity to cancel plans. Tell them when you're wanting to cancel plans, to show them what that looks like, and tell them it's okay if you're not feeling up to doing things that you agreed to do a week or two ago. These kind of things are really important to make sure that the people that are in our circle that we love are okay. You do not want to be the source of another person's mental breakdown. And I do see that happen. By the time people get to me, they're talking about how they've had to cut everybody off and everybody's just using them and they're so overwhelmed. And you know, it sounds like, oh wow, you just don't have any insight, like everybody's using you. But usually those people, what they're trying to do is earn your love. They want to feel needed and loved by you. And you have to make it clear to them that they don't have to earn your love. The love is already there. And anything that they do for you, they should be doing it from a place of they have the energy, they have the resources. They should not be depleting themselves to help us out. That for me is the biggest thing I took away in terms of Bella's character arc, is that for the first time in her life, I think she could see that she had to survive. I mean, we've seen her say countless times, I don't want my soul.
Kill me, not him.
She just did not value her life as much as the people around her. But now, if she's gone, who is going to shield them from everything that's happening? So she has to at least put herself into the equation. And so I think that was actually one of my favorite things about her character, is that even though at the end of the day, it's still self-sacrificing and you still don't want your only motivation to be to care for the people around you. If that is a motivation, at least bare minimum, I want you to be a part of that equation. They always use the plane metaphor of the oxygen mask. You've got to put it over yourself before you can help someone else. And, you know, I'm tired of hearing that metaphor just like everybody else is, but dang, it's such a good metaphor. And what else is really going to communicate that better than that one? So those are my thoughts on Breaking Dawn Part 2. We're at the end of the series. It's so amazing to sit here and talk about this with you guys. I still remember sitting in a theater when Breaking Dawn Part 2 came out and they gave us the fake out ending. I mean, I was shook. Completely shook when Carlisle was the first one, when his head is rolling on the floor, and I'm like, what the heck? I could not believe that was what was happening, because they had put rumors out in the press that the movie was going to end differently than the books. In the books, we don't have the fake out ending, so everybody was in shock. They revealed that it was just Alice's vision. I thought that was probably one of the best culminations of a series that I'd seen, because a lot of times I feel like they lose their way in terms of movie endings, especially when everybody already knows the end because of a book. I thought that was a really good ending. I mean, whenever you're dealing with visions, time travel, anything like that, there's always going to be loopholes in the storyline. But like I said last time, I can look past stuff and just enjoy it for an entertaining story. I love the soundtrack in Breaking Dawn Part 2. 1,000 Years. I mean, could that song be any more perfect? And you know what's so crazy? I literally know people who play this song at their wedding, or they say it's their favorite song, and they don't even know that it was written for Twilight, that it came from Twilight. So, you know, this was one of those things where people like hate Twilight, but you don't even know, like, the cultural shift that happened from Twilight. You don't even know. It reminds me of that scene in The Devil Wears Prada where Meryl Streep is telling her, like, oh, you thought you picked this blue out of nowhere. Like, no, the people in this room picked that blue for you. That's how I feel about people who don't recognize the influence of Twilight on the world. But I think that the montage that they had at the end, where they showed every single actor that was in the entire series, including actors who had been recasted, like the character of Victoria, I was sobbing. And you know what? I still do. When Bella finally figures out how to share her thoughts with Edward and share all the thoughts she's been having, that just gives me goosebumps even talking about it now. Just the fact that she was finally able to share her thoughts that she'd been shielding from him their entire relationship. There are flaws in this story, but this is still a story that is so close to my heart. And I think I will always love Twilight. I will always love it. I can see the flaws, I can see the problems, and I will continuously educate people on how not to take these narratives as examples for what we should be striving toward or expecting from the people in our actual lives. But man, what a story. And it's been so good going through all these movies with you all. I love the Twilight community we have on here. I hope we can find another series so I'll just pick up, move the bus, and go to, and just keep writing it out together. You guys are so kind. And if you're in the live premiere, thank you for chatting with me live. This is one of my favorite parts of releasing videos now. And hearing your thoughts as we go is one of my favorite things ever. So you guys are the best. I ask that you like this video, subscribe to my channel, please share it with any fellow Twilight fans, and I want to thank you for watching all the way until the end. You did not have to do that, but the fact that you did helps me a lot, and I appreciate you for it. So thank you, thank you, thank you.